Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Black British Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Debbie, and today we have the incredible Fiona Reynolds with us again. How are you doing?
Hello there. I am fine. Happy to be here as always.
Thank you for joining us as always. So Fiona is a grief expert. I want to get this right, so I'm reading it out. Fiona is a grief expert, emotional wellbeing advocate, and was our keynote speaker at the inaugural Parenthood and Wellbeing Conference last year. She gave such a powerful talk on grief, loss, and bereavement that really resonated with so many of the people that joined us that day. Fiona, it's so good to have you back. How have you been?
I've been well, thank you. I am supremely pleased that you received good feedback on, the whole conference. I mean, that was amazing, an amazing experience for me, and I was really, really privileged to be a part of it. As always, the work that you do is so centered on how we best serve the Black community and how the Black community best serves itself. So to be on, what still is an incredible journey with you as within the work that you do, as you grow and expand. That really is something I feel is really special. So thank you for including me. I say thank you for having me as a speaker. Keynote, wow. And I'm really, really pleased that it was so well received from, the feedback you've given me so far. What I hoped to say seemed to be what was heard. So that leaves me in a really good place.
I appreciate that. And thank you again. I mean, you've been so supportive of our journey from the early beginnings of Black British Parent all the way through. You see me cry, you see me scream and shout, trying to manage and make sure we're doing and delivering and providing what we set out to be doing. I mean, so many people have so much advice about how to do things, and they're all valid perspectives, but you've been one of those main core supporters who's always got the vision and was able to advise us based on the vision that you understood clearly. So we're definitely grateful for all of that. And with regards to the conference, what was funny though, I have to say, was that you had your notes and didn't use one of them, didn't you? And everyone was so moved with what you had shared, and it just all came from your heart and your soul. And I think that's what really resonated with people, from your experiences as well. I was a bit nervous about having, grief be the main and beginning conversation, but it definitely worked very, very well and kind of set the tone for the rest of the day. So, man, hats off to you and thank you so much.
Thank you.
As I was saying, you absolutely moved the room with your talk at the conference. So many parents were talking about it afterwards. How did it feel to share the message, and what was one of the biggest takeaways from those conversations? You kind of answered that a little bit before, but yeah, what was your biggest takeaway?
I really think people know what grief is and know its place in their lives, in their lived existence, shall we say. But it's still really kind of validating when, as I'm speaking, explaining, going through something, that I see the waking up in their faces. They're literally making connections as I'm talking, and that's so crucial because they are getting the validation for themselves that I actually knew this, and the reassurance that they're maybe not okay. That might not be the right word, but they are okay.
Yeah.
And it will get better because they are where they need to be. And we have to tap into these darker spaces of our existence because it belongs to us and it is part of our development and growth. You can't have growth without internal conflict, without the friction. It's hand in hand.
Yeah. It's almost like, I think nowadays, maybe I took advantage of the design and symbolism of it before, but that concept of yin and yang, needing the dark and the light and balancing each other out. You know, they say no pain, no gain. And I never really understood that, because it's like, why do I have to have pain and discomfort to be able to gain? But that's where some of the biggest lessons are, unfortunately. So, or fortunately,
No, fortunately, because it's all also how you learn about yourself. And I'm probably jumping ahead, but you know, the thing called resilience, you know, this thing called resilience that people believe they need to reach for and learn about. Again, it's within you, but it's almost like a muscle that you have to work. You know, you go into weight training and you build your weights, you build your reps, and that's how your muscles develop and grow. And you feed them with oxygen and, you know, get your blood pumping, and you have to have the right resources to grow well. So resilience is something people forget or don't realize comes every day that you engage with and you employ your internal resources, and you finish the day, you wake up the next day refreshed, more resilient because you already had it. It's not something new.
As you're saying, so I'm thinking of, like, you know, weight trainers trying to jump straight into the 350K straight away without building up. Yeah, that's not a good look. You have to slowly, gradually put the work in. So today, we're talking about something that a lot of us struggle with. You mentioned kind of touching a little bit, just with what you were saying before, resistance to change. I see the eyebrow. Whether it's with dealing with loss, adjusting to new circumstances, or even like breaking old habits, change can be really tough.
Yeah.
From your experience, why do we fight it so much, even though we know it's necessary?
There is a lot of comfort in discomfort, and a lot of fear in releasing familiarity. And when we consider how uncomfortable stepping into new things can be, it's understandable that people will resist change, especially when they don't know what it means to step into the newness. Some of the resistance is about misconceptions of themselves and of the newness that is facing them. Maybe there's not enough research done. Maybe, you know, the knowledge that they are carrying is impure, inaccurate, and it's tainted how they approach what change is needed. I think there's also a deeper, more cultural aspect to how we as a people approach change. It borders on our ability to trust, and using that trust in ourselves to make good decisions. And on a much wider level, you know, we have been, I would say, conditioned out of trusting ourselves and our resources, trusting each other, trusting our community. So we look beyond what's right in front of us, which means that we're not taking the next step. When we think about change, we actually look way beyond the parameters of what it belongs to the next step. And then obviously it's going to be a leap rather than a step. So it becomes too much.
Yeah.
Way too much. So I think our approach needs to be adjusted. Our considerations need to begin from within. Be honest about what our limitations are and our abilities are. And then consider how we process the need for change. So it's steps within steps, but it begins with us. And if we don't know ourselves, if we've not done what we need to do to know ourselves and stay connected to ourselves as individuals, then obviously we're not going to trust what is outside of ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting because all of that, I had many experiences of that myself in many ways, and I imagine many of our listeners have as well. And I find it profound on the basis that, like when we're forced to change, there can be in some ways a resistance to that, but then when you ain't got a choice, then you follow through. I mean, I would imagine, like, for example, different eras, stages that we go through, each era changes. For example, the booming of having social media, and that's a part of change that everybody naturally assimilated to. I mean, there's many of us that resisted it, but overall...
Yeah, me too. I think I led the charge on that one. I'm still resistant to the digital changes that are, as you say, forced on us.
But then there's so many of us that are so into it. Do you see what I mean? At the same time, those of us who might seemingly see have the attitude that we're resistant to change, with certain changes, we don't even think about it and just assimilate along with them.
Yes, true. And one of the things that I have had to accommodate, all right, going back to pandemic, because that was tremendous.
I was going to go there, but I didn't know if I should, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, that literally was an enforced change, not just about how we do things and what we're working with, but also how we live as individuals. Like, you're forced to stay in. You're forced to have companionship with people, individuals, other individuals
100%.
that you don't necessarily want to accommodate. You're forced to either succumb or fight against the tide of belief around what this thing is and what the response, or I should say reactions, were to this thing that was around. Pandemic, I'm not naming it because people have different names for it, but...
We say the pandemic.
We'll say the pandemic, yes. And I don't know any one of us can say we genuinely coped well with it.
Yeah.
Thing is, if you didn't cope well while you were in it, you're absolutely not going to cope well outside of it.
Yes.
Yeah. However, what has happened is the world has moved on. Time has moved on. We don't have any control over time. The day the earth revolves is science, and nothing directs that except itself. So we work with it. But in working with it, we're not necessarily engaging with it. We're not putting ourselves in there. So what potentially is happening is a part of you is submitting, I guess, and conforming unwillingly, but you're doing it because you have to get along, And the rest of us as individuals, the other parts of us are like looking on and watching and maybe cussing even, certainly resisting.
Yeah.
Very unhappy about that part of ourselves that has to be in the mix in order to survive. So now we're split as a person. There's more than one side of us at any given time, but now we are in real conflict. And this is not growth conflict. This is war, where I want to do this way. I don't want to engage with that. And so internally, we're fighting ourselves to be true to something that no longer exists, but we're not at the point yet where we can accept and admit that actually this is where we are, not because the world is there, but because we recognize that our place has moved.
Yes.
And that's hard. It's even harder when you haven't done the internal work that builds the resilience, that allows you to pull from a well of confidence that I can do this, I will grow into this. Because we feel everything's out of control.
Thank you so much for that. That was just so, because I'm in what you're saying, I can see that in so many different areas, changes to school, changes to job, like that example of what is, like, there's so many areas where we're forced to have to change and we have to accept it, but we still haven't evolved into that change potentially yet. And then dealing with not necessarily the consequences, but the evolution of that, what that grows into for us. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, you are, because what that then leads, so if we move on to what's the aftermath of that, is we're carrying this internal war, right? It's beyond conflict. It's now an internal war. We have to put game face on, right? Because especially the trope, angry black woman, we can't walk out there showing any of this churning that's happening with us. The men, oh my goodness, they can't do anything that is even sideways, a breath that appears out of the ordinary.
Yeah.
So you have to hold it in while you're out of your own environment.
Yeah.
And when now you come back to your environment, there's restrictions even there. Because you have your children to deal with. Well, you have your community to deal with first. And if each of our community is hurting in the same way that we are, they can't bear our burden, right? So we still have to maintain probably a slightly different game face, but game face nonetheless. So each step of the way, where's our resting place?
Yeah.
You know, we pass through our community, literally pass through.
Yeah.
Because we can't rest on them, we don't want them to rest on us. And then we reach our home, and what do we have there? You know, our children with their conflicts, with their issues. And I don't necessarily agree with this, and maybe another time we can address this, but in our own homes, we don't show our children our authentic selves.
Amen. I don't even go to church. Jesus. Listen.
So
man.
then, you know, so we engage with our children and our parents and our grandparents.
Yeah.
And none of that has any authenticity. So this war is building and building and building within us, even more on so many different levels.
So many levels.
And what do we do with that? We go, you know, try to relax? No, we don't relax. We disengage, which is completely different. Turn on the TV, play the game, maybe play music. We're now operating as robots.
Yeah.
Nothing is addressed.
And I think, do you know what the profound thing? Sorry, go on.
Then we go to bed. And then we go to bed and we don't sleep, or we don't get a full sleep. So we are all even more diminished because
on the go,
we are not replenished, we're not refreshed. And then we wake up in the morning, cycle repeat, but with less.
Like Groundhog Day. Yeah.
Worse, because we have no opportunity to recover.
I'd like, as a practitioner or someone that holds space for others, it can be so challenging because you're going through the same thing to somewhat degree or a similar version of that. And whilst that also, because like I find that users of your services, like they expect you to be gone past it to be able to then support them or have all the answers to somewhat degree. But then I think what makes a profound practitioner and specialist or whatever, expert in the field, the fact that you're going through it helps you to be able to be relatable to the person that you're supporting. And that I find that kind of a bit challenging sometimes.
As with everything else, you have to have balance.
Yeah.
So there's...
And I don't mean challenging for me, but it's how to negate dealing with those who are using your service,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Yeah,
No, I understand. So for me, for how the work I do, there's, I guess, 2 or 3 different ways I present myself. So I do one-to-one work, and that's kind of in a capsule. That I think is the best way I can describe it, because you're in the therapy room and it's just you and one other, you and the other person, and everything is about what happens in that room, in that session.
It's more tailored to that person as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I am a person-centered therapist, so literally or mostly it's about what the person brings.
Yeah.
So it's very, I hope other practitioners forgive me, but it's very easy to leave myself out, because it's so much easier to focus on what they're bringing. There's nothing more than that in the room. That doesn't mean I don't engage. That doesn't mean it doesn't.
It's not authentic. It's still authentic.
It is still absolutely authentic, but I am there for that purpose, to receive what's brought. So there's that side. There's the side where I do workshops and group work, where I'm more like a wider, a broader vision, a broader kind of embrace, let's call it. So that takes more of me, more of who I am, but still within the confines of therapeutic support. And then there's talks that I will give or deliver, presentations that I make. And fortunately, I can be all of me.
Yeah.
Well, most of me. And that's more about how I tailor what I'm delivering according to the audience, the needs of the audience. And I think I've been very fortunate that the audience or the recipients that I have had to date have received me as I am.
In all your entirety.
Yeah.
Same here, to some degree.
Yeah, and I really, really, it humbles me.
Yeah.
And I'm so appreciative of it, because I can go verbatim and I can deliver the words, but when I'm able to kind of tap into the fact, I'm very forgetful when somebody says, oh, when you said this, that, and the other, I'm like, did I say that? I mean, I am terrible at remembering. Once it's left, I don't know if it's because my brain works that fast, or maybe it might be overload. I don't know. It's gone, but it's landed with you, and that's okay. So feed it back to me, because that's the important thing. That when you feed it back to me, you are giving me what you've received, and that is much more important.
100%.
Than how I've given it to you, or the verbatim. That's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Hey family, we hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to stay up to date with all things Black British Parent, we've got the perfect way for you to do just that. Join our mailing list and be the first to know about new episodes, exciting news, and upcoming events. It's super easy to sign up. Just head over to our website and into your email. Don't miss out on the latest from Black British Parent. Join our community today. Now, back to the show.
I think what I'm getting at as well, though, more specifically, is there's those areas, like you said, where we are able to, we know that even if someone's in our presence and they're not sure what they're going to get, but they know they're going to get something, they're already kind of pre-prepared.
Yeah.
I think outside of that, when it comes to people that think they want your support or want your assistance with whatever challenge that they're having to adjust to or grow from or evolve from, this idea of the initial where they've come to you, not where they I think what I'm getting at is the idea that they know they need support, but that resistance, and then it's almost like you've got to prove to them that this is not necessarily the way to do it, but the suggestions that you're offering them in terms of that option. Do you get what I mean? In terms of that aspect.
I hear what you're saying. So
That sounded so indirect and all over the place, but I couldn't. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
maybe let me see if I can shape it up for you. So I won't necessarily, I won't agree necessarily that I'm proving to them that this is what they need or this is what they're looking for, because the mere fact they've taken the steps
Yes.
towards seeking support, towards asking even what kind of support.
But that's different
what
to a
support looks
one-to-one
like.
person and or someone that's come to a conference or you've done a group setting, because as much as that is the case, they've made that step to consciously be there.
Right.
Whereas somebody who's seeking to figure out if you are or this is their route.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
So there's a consideration of what therapy is, what it looks like. There's also a consideration of information, do they have, and if they don't, what kind of information they're looking for, as opposed to what misconceptions they carry.
Yes, you did mention that before, the misconceptions.
And a lot of time in the misconceptions serve as their information. And then it's a case of, well, you can't give me what I'm looking for because that's the wall that's between us already. And even then, it depending on what shape their internal conflict is taking, it wouldn't matter what I say.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the journey really is theirs. That journey of discovery is there. And even if it's baby steps, it still has to be their steps.
Thank you. You got what I'm saying, because
Yeah. Just to go back to that kind of how I present it, I really want to emphasize that I don't do this alone, as in my balance comes from being supported through supervision. And supervision takes care of the clinical work, what happens in terms of the care of not just the one-to-ones, even with the group work. And even, I have a very generous supervisor. So even doing things like presentations and that, I can bring that to my supervisor and kind of run through my perspective and, my hopes and expectations of myself. And then there's also therapy. There's always amazement when a therapist says they're in therapy. But we have stuff, you're right. We carry stuff. We are who we are because of what we've been through, and that applies to each and every one of us. We're not superhuman. And we're not above our own conflicts. In fact, most of us have had our conflicts that caused us to take the path that we did, the career path that we did. And in recognition of that, we take it to therapy, because being whole is different from being healed. And we should always, each and every one of us, our key aim is to strive to be whole. There's a lot of emphasis on being healed.
Yes.
But even healing carries scars.
Yes.
And you can't ignore that. So being whole means that you've knitted together the places that you can reach. And they're still on some unreachable places for many different reasons.
And acknowledging that even though you might not have worked on it.
And it's the acknowledgement that matters more than anything else. Because with the acknowledgement, I can say in certain cases, that this is not the client for me, or this is not the type of work for me, not at this time. I am not the right person for this, or the right professional for this. And know within myself that I've made the best decision for myself and for the recipients. And I think more than anything else, that's what matters in the work that we do, that you know who you are and when you need to be the person that's required.
Thank you so much for that. Because there is definitely that difference between being whole and being healed. And it's easy because healing and being healed, as you know, is becoming this buzzword all over the place. And it can be used quite narcissistically against each other in terms of whether, I can decide whether you're healed or not.
Weaponized.
Yeah. And I think that can make things a lot more confusing for people, especially when they're embarking on change or evolving within themselves, or even addressing long-term hurts and pains that they've been carrying for a long time.
Absolutely. And that then creates more resistance to change.
Yeah.
So, again, it's about what's the community carrying as a community and as individuals within that community that then gets foisted, imposed upon, other individuals that add to the war.
Yeah.
Become another weapon.
It gets so deep so quick. So, based on what we've been saying, I wanted to kind of take it into like managing pushback from family with our changes. So, I think like a big part of why change is so hard is that it doesn't just affect us.
Yeah.
It affects the people around us as well.
Absolutely.
Parents, partners, even our children can resist when we try to do things differently. So how can we navigate those moments without feeling like we're constantly battling with our own families?
Sorry to say this, but the battle will always be there. Because even if you have a good support network that is engaged with your change, your process of change, not everybody's going to be at the same place. And not everybody's going to have the same understanding. I can say one thing to you, and by the time you've reached, your husband, your children, your family, it's changed. You've missed out one word, you've added a comma. The nature of what is being said has changed. But then we haven't even addressed your understanding, how you received what I said. You might repeat the exact words, but you receive it internally in a different way. And that's down to your experiences, your experiences shape and color the filter that you view the world through. And we don't always take stock of what that looks like. So how we understand things from our perspective about other people is mostly due to that filter. So change now as an individual within a family setting, ideally you'd be carrying everybody alongside with you, but not necessarily at the same time with you. So if you don't have that recognition, and if you don't give that recognition, then you're going to end up at war with each other. Your expectations on all sides will be unmet.
Yeah.
So it's important, as you process your need for change, to involve whoever else is involved. Obviously, there's limits. You don't need to share everything. You set boundaries, and most of these boundaries, most of the time when we say boundaries, people assume that it means keeping people out. But boundaries, personal boundaries, can also be about how you look after yourself, how you shape your interactions in this process of change, in terms of you kind of just state very simply, look, I'm not going to be available to you in the way that I have been up till now. And this, you could be talking to your daughter. I'm set on this journey. I'm trying to discover the world of work. So if you don't mind, count me out on Tuesdays. I know that used to be a day when I used to cook dinner, but can I ask you to step in? Because I really need to focus on this area of my life right now. And that's you setting a boundary for yourself, that you are dedicating this time to yourself and you're asking for help in this particular way. And you're including your family in this step that you're about to take. And as just one thing, one element. Now, as I said, not everybody is going to be on the same page. So maybe next Tuesday she might not feel like she wants to cook dinner. And it comes back to you, but does it? You've already set your boundary. You've already stated your needs. So you're perfectly entitled to say, but, well, I did say I'm not going to be available on Tuesdays. So, okay, if you don't want to cook, that's fine. Sort it out with the rest of the family as to what they would like to do for dinner. But can you not include me on Tuesdays? Please? I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. And that is a beautiful example. So again, I appreciate that. I'm just thinking while you're speaking about the times where things have been challenging for whatever reason, for example, as a parent, or even as a child, as an adult child, where, you might have been going through things, and whatever you was going through might have had a kind of, I wouldn't say negative, but not a pleasant consequence to actions with whoever it is you're in relationship with. And I'm just thinking, like, those moments when, after having that unpleasant interaction, and you've then gone on to change, and that person is still holding space for rightly so how into somewhat degree, because obviously it's impacted them, so you can understand why they might not be so open to this so-called change you've undergone. Those can be very challenging moments for all involved.
Absolutely. And you know me always, one of my common phrases, it begins with you. Everything begins with you. So if you are incorporating change for yourself and recognizing it impacts the family, it's a must for you to be inclusive in the most boundaried way, using that phrase again, in the most generous and considerate way that you can include the family. And then, frankly, it's their responsibility to respond to that, not react to it. Somebody who stood off to the side sulking, like, well, I don't want you to do this, that, and the other because I feel like that's a reaction. And that's, we can name it, but we're not going to.
And it gets confused with accountability to somewhat degree. Just what I'm saying, like putting that blame on that person.
Can we have another podcast for that?
Yeah, we can. Okay, should we move forward? But you know what I'm getting at? A lot of families are, my work as a doula, being a birth coach, it puts us in sometimes quite an intimate space with families, and you can see some of the dynamics. I'm not even, trying to speak about the clients I've worked with, but just generally, there's a lot of parent wounds. There's a lot of relationship wounds and stuff like that we carry on through being pregnant and birthing. So I guess in my mind, that's what
we see out in the wider community examples of families in conflict simply from the language they use with each other. Right? Parent to child, parents to each other, or even adults to each other. But step aside from.
Could be the siblings,
You're right, right, exactly. The language they use to each other, it's inconsiderate, it's mocking, it's, language that does not bring peace, right? That really invites conflict, that is constantly at war. So we see clear examples that if you're like this outside of your home, oh my goodness, what happens behind closed doors, where there's no need to hold back. So this may not be because one person is choosing to change. This may simply be that this is how they have always been. And where does that begin? Where does that come from? This is partly socialization, external, in terms of what they see on TV, how they witness behaviors, but also, what's come into the home by way of what they've learned from their own family members, how they've interacted, the older generation have interacted with each other and with them. They have no reason to be any different. Not yet. Not on, and most of the time, this will continue until each individual has been given a reason, however that looks.
Thank you.
And then the decision to begin the process of change begins. And that's going to be even more conflicting, But we as individuals have a responsibility to ourselves to be authentic for our own good. And that's talking health, that's talking well-being, that's talking mental health. On every level, we have a responsibility to ourselves. And if it results in, if the consequence is external conflict, again, if you have shared your process of change considerately, compassionately as well.
That's a big one.
And engaged to the best of your ability and your family members' ability, engaged with them that this is no longer who I intend to be, then it's entirely up to the other parties to take responsibility for how they receive what you do for yourself. Very clear boundary.
Yeah. That's such a big one. It's such a big sort of area. Which leads me on to my next question. In our community, there's often feelings of this is how we've always done it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that mindset holds us back. Sometimes.
Yes.
How can we start shifting those patterns without feeling like we're turning our backs on our culture and our traditions?
Ooh,
Your
that's
facial
3 parts.
expressions.
Okay, so we have ourselves, we have the community, and we have the culture that surrounds us, that I won't say governs, because that's too strong a word, but maybe not, because if we start with culture, people look at culture as the say-so, the be-all and the end-all. And I see that as either a lack of understanding or a conscious choice for not taking responsibility for what you're doing and saying, blaming it on the culture. Now, culture and traditions they have a beginning. That means they have an end. It begins with one person doing one thing that other people see, they take on board, and it grows from that point and becomes what we call a tradition or the culture, which means that it can be changed. I have asked numerous times when people refer to tradition and to culture, like, this is the culture, or this is the tradition. My question is, who says? What makes you think that? Where did you get that information from? What's the meaning and intent behind it? And what does this have to do with you and what you want for yourself? And that's not to stray from the bonding you can get from responding within the cultural, what am I trying to say? Within the cultural expectations and norms, there's an element of bonding, music, dance, cooking, food. Those things, you say a word, you have a look, and you instantly know what the other person means. And, you're in tune immediately. And there's a huge benefit from that. But that doesn't mean that you are bound to it for life. It's an acknowledgement that there is this invisible kind of cord, that keeps you all tethered to a mutual understanding that belongs to you. That's yours and nobody else's, or anybody else, they need explanation, and tough on them, And there's a beauty in that I don't think we should lose. However, when cultural understandings and applications and traditions affect your ability to take care of yourself and impact on how you present yourself in the wider society. There has to be a rethink about the benefits
of said culture.
That element of culture.
The specific element, because it might not be the whole thing. So I hear you. Yeah. Thank you. While you're saying it, I'm thinking about my love for macaroni and cheese, but I can't eat it.
Oh, you can't?
Yeah, I can, but I shouldn't. Because the cheese and the pasta and all of that doesn't agree with me. And then rice and peas, oh my gosh, rice and peas, but rice and...
Well, I definitely relate, because I can't. I'm going to be disowned by the Prime Minister of Jamaica.
Don't say that.
But I can't eat ackee.
Oh no, you're disowned by me, I'm not even Jamaican. But I hear it, and it's just. But those are things that are like, and as an example, analogy in terms of what you were referring to in terms of parts of our culture. These are all things that people across the Caribbean know is standard staple for, our cuisine. But it's evolving. There's people making quinoa and peas now instead of rice and peas to make up. But it's the alternative, so they can still have that flavor and that taste, but knowing that they can't eat the rice.
Yeah.
It's an example of what you're saying in terms of letting go of certain parts and moving on. But the blink in your eye just said why. Just showed why.
Yeah.
It's so
it
challenging.
matters. It matters.
Yeah.
It does matter. It's a part of who we are.
Yeah.
That you make as an individual make who we are better, because you're authentic to yourself.
Look at me using food as an analogy for improving ourselves. Just shows where my mind is at right now.
Yeah, you're hungry.
So, okay. One thing that you said at the conference that stuck with me is that grief isn't just about losing a loved one, and that it can be about losing a version of ourselves, a way of life, or even an idea of what we thought the way things should be, or how they would be. That's a key one, how we imagine things would be. How can people recognize when their resistance to change is actually about grief?
Okay, so change and loss go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. And it's hard, even looking back, to figure out which one came first, whether it was the loss or the change. Now, we live day to day without acknowledging for ourselves anything more than the more impactful changes, but even the smaller ones, even though we ignore them, they still have an impact. Which suggests that if you follow the thought, change equals loss, loss equals change, and either one of those initiate grief, that means we're practically grieving throughout the day without acknowledging it. We in general have this wrongly held idea that only the big changes and loss deserve grief. So ideally, if we step back at the end of every day and review, recapture those moments where, if you responded to a change, if there was a change and you did what the change demanded of you, that was a reaction because you didn't consciously engage with it. Whether or not you consciously engage with a loss, because you've now lost kind of your momentum in a particular direction and you've lost control of those moments, you would have a moment of grief. You'd have, I kind of wish I hadn't done that, or why couldn't this work out? That's an expression of grief. Now, at the end of the day, if you review, okay, so I had those moments where things didn't quite work out how I wanted to. But it's okay, the end result was this, that, and the other. You're acknowledging for yourself that you've experienced change, loss, and even experienced things that were out of your control momentarily. And an expression, emotional expression, psychological acknowledgement is your expression of grief, your recognition and acknowledgement of grief. So it doesn't have to be an outpouring of big emotion, but it can be something as small as an acknowledgement at the end of the day that this was not the day I planned. But it's okay. I'm okay. Check in with yourself, as I suggest everybody does at the end of the day. So you finish the day and allow yourself to rest, recuperate, and replenish for the next day. Because the morning you get up, you refresh, and you check in with yourself, and you assess your limits for that coming day. Sorry, just a quick sell.
No, go ahead.
And that prepares you to carry forward any emotional impact, because you may face the same moments the following day, because this is now you're now operating kind of with foreknowledge, but you're also recognizing that certain elements of your day belong to somebody else and not yourself as you had expectations. So you're better prepared. Now, fast forward now, you've had a week of change, a week of doing things that you didn't plan to do in the way you planned to do it, or, it just didn't meet up with what you hoped it was going to be. Most of us, we zone out, we're frustrated, where we take it out on everybody else.
We're not going to that thing no more because...
Exactly. We shut down. But how often do we actually sit and think, man, that just, I'm sick to my stomach of this, how things went. Just acknowledging your emotional response, your feelings, and your thoughts about it without even looking for redress. You're just acknowledging where you are with all of that. That is you giving yourself an opportunity to grieve, even though it's delayed, but it still happens. And we don't do that. We carry on and carry on and carry on. And so what happens is the emotional reactions, because we're not acknowledging it, becomes reactions, not responses. So we're not responding now. We are reacting from this point forward because we haven't checked in with ourselves. So therefore, we're carrying grief forward until we get permission. And that permission usually comes with a big event. And new grief wakes up old grief. So in grieving the loss of a dog, for example, a pet, a pet's died, you bawl your eyes out, legitimately. I'm not judging that. But you bawl your eyes out for a month, and you can't understand why this has impacted you so heavily. Yes, you had, that was your emotional support pet. Yes, they've been around from, puppyhood, kittenhood. All of it legitimizes your grief in those moments. But is that all that's there? Do you give yourself the opportunity to examine what else you're carrying? Very often you don't. And what happens is this build-up of suppressed emotions leave us half-finished, unfinished, and unprepared.
So we want to be able to raise our children to be resilient to change, even though sometimes we're not necessarily good at it ourselves. How can we help our children embrace change with confidence, especially when we're still figuring it out as well?
The one thing that I would ask all parents to recognize is the need to be authentic with their children, with everybody, but supremely with their children. How many times, I'm throwing this back at you, how many times could you say, and you don't necessarily have to answer this, but how many times has you said something to one of your children for them to say, yeah, but you don't? Sassy.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't respond because they're right. They're right.
Usually what the response would have been, I'm a big woman, I'm the adult, you're the child, do as I say, not as I do. But that doesn't work so much in this time, so a lot of our parents are stuck.
Yeah.
Now.
Maybe I should have said, how many times did we look at our parents? But we wouldn't say it, but we'd look at them like, yeah, and you. But we can't, as parents, we can't, as adults, not just parents, because I fully believe you don't have to have a child yourself to associate with children and set
or be responsible, accountable for other children. Yeah,
exactly. So who you are as a person, it covers whatever stage of life or state of life you hold, status in life you hold. So authenticity is key, and if we're going to be authentic with anybody else, we first have to be authentic with ourselves. So admit your limitations. It sounds simple, but the only difficulty with admitting limitations is pride and ego. That's two. We have an idea that as parents, we need to be the superhuman in the room, that we are infallible, that we can't afford. We know we make mistakes, but we cannot afford for our children to see us make mistakes. I mean, that's a load of rubbish because they don't see already.
100%. Just they haven't said nothing to you. But I think,
exactly.
Do you know, but with that though, with that being said, there are many parents who are authentic in that way or are striving for that authenticity. However,
I'm
it can be.
there.
But, okay.
I'm going to pause you there because I really need to make it clear. Being authentic does not mean being friends with your children.
Okay.
There's a huge difference. And I see a lot, far too many professionals, people that I would think could make the distinction. They choose friendship as a way of being authentic.
Yeah.
So there are no boundaries.
Yeah.
Being authentic is about how you present yourself, but starting with what you know about yourself, and that covers the everything about 100%. Who you are. That doesn't mean spilling your guts to your children. That doesn't mean telling your children about your activities when you went out into a club. It doesn't mean bringing your children to the club with you, and excusing your behavior in front of them.
Going clubbing with your children
and
showing them the ropes so they don't.
It depends on the age.
I'm not saying that.
No, it depends on the age.
But yeah, of course. Okay, age appropriate. That's all I was referring to. Only
age appropriate.
Yeah.
Right.
Anytime beyond that is a different thing. But I think what I was getting at is, in terms of the authenticity, I think being transparent and not necessarily oversharing, but being transparent. For some, like that pride and ego thing you're saying, in terms of what that can. Some parents might not necessarily be too bothered with that, but the era of generation today, that can be seen or received as being a sign of weakness. Do you see what I mean? Even without oversharing, if that makes sense. And some parents might be afraid of that, hence why they might not want to. Do you see what I'm? No?
Yeah, but that still comes back to pride.
Yeah.
Still comes back to pride.
I hear you. Yeah, definitely.
There's also the mistake now, didn't exist before, but there's also the mistaken thinking that doing what your child values puts you kind of in that realm of being authentic. Again, that's, without boundaries. What your children value is what children value. Yeah. What you as an adult value and honor and pay attention to is what adults should pay attention to. So the TikTok craze and the social media behavior that parents are, what's it called? Doing reels, forgive me. I mean, I'm evidently not in tune, or as in tune as I should be. But this thing about doing reels, exposés on your everyday life, everyday, all day activities in front of your children, but accessible by your children as well, where even your innermost thoughts are expressed and accessible. Maybe not to your children, but say to the neighbor's children, to the children at school. That's still your children, and it's worse because now your children are getting it secondhand. That's, come on. Come on, man.
Just when they're young, so young that they can't even agree to, they can't even say yes to doing it. And then years later, they might see that content. I would imagine how challenging that would be, how potentially the potentials of that.
You know, in 5 years' time, some of today's children will be the adults, young adults, because I also do work with children. I'm certified to work in bereavement with children. So
I knew this, but I haven't made a point of saying that. But thank you for letting everyone know, because that's important. My bad.
But I foresee in 5 years' time, this flock of children are, in fact, I know I may see them in 5 years' time, but I know of other practitioners who are bearing witness. It really is sad. Honestly, I've just suddenly got emotional because it's so, so sad that you have young men and women, not quite teenagers, who are lost in the belief sets that they carry. You know, things I can't even express here, the things that they bring that they are confused about, that are so far ahead of their time. And this is down to what's happening through social media and supported by behavior of parents. Maybe they don't believe it directly impacts on their children, but it does. It does, even secondhand. It really does.
My mind thinks in that show, I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix, Adolescence, that came out over the weekend.
I saw a clip of
Goodness
it.
me, mate. That was something profound. And even in that story, it's a circumstance where the parents didn't do anything, but then the not doing might have had an impact as well. So,
you know, there's omission as much that is as impactful as commission. And we have a responsibility to recognize, we owe our children so much more than secondary commitment. It's full commitment, because until they start making their own way through the world, they rely on us. They're looking to us for everything.
Even when they're out into the world, they're still... So final words. For anyone listening who knows they need to change, whether it's in how they parent or how they take care of themselves, or even how they deal with grief, but they just can't seem to take that first step, what would you say to them?
They've already taken the first step by recognizing there's a need there. It doesn't have to be a huge jump into their next step. The process of change is important as the change itself. So understanding that they're not where they should be for whatever reason is tremendously important. It's a huge beginning. And then you take time. As always, anything I say about the self, it comes from an understanding, I hope, that you need to connect to yourself. You need to spend time with yourself. You need to examine yourself, your self-talk, your self-management, your emotional input and output, and the ways in which the strategies you have and the resources you have. So when I speak of self, that's a whole package that I'm referring to. So when all of that is engaged, that package is engaged, and you're now reviewing this urge or this recognition that I'm carrying something. What was this about? It's some things that's happened that's woken you up. That's a very important first step. And in digging a little bit deeper, gently, and having self-compassion, so important. And compassion isn't about what you give out. It's self first. So with kindness, you review, what's prompted you, what's prodded you, and why. And that will help you recognize what your next step is, and then the next step. And slowly, you will also resource yourself with each new layer of knowledge that you unpeel. So process, always process.
Thank you so much, Fiona. You're always a blessing to have, and I'm always intrigued with our conversations on and off camera. But as always, this is a great conversation, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and just keeping it real with us today, as always.
Thank you for having me.
If people want to connect with you, please, and also get in touch with your work, please let people know how they can find you.
Okay, so one of the easiest ways would be through Instagram, which is at grieve365 freely. I also have a email address, and that's fiona.lifeandloss, one word, @gmail.com.
Thank you so much.
I would also, ask you generously to field any inquiries. Anybody comes to you, by all means, just
standard. That's always the case. Always the case.
Exactly.
You know how it is. But yes, guys, thank you so much for joining us in this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, it was quite a heavy conversation, but it's definitely a much needed one. But yeah, until next time, take care and stay safe.